Good morning. It's May 19th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the G7 summit taking place in Japan's Hiroshima this weekend. The G7 leaders are poised to put their heads together to solidify their commitment on keeping the international order based on the rule of law. President Yoon will also be there for an anticipated trilateral sit-down with Biden and Kishida. And ahead of the G7 summit, the leaders of Washington and Tokyo point out the importance of South Korea-Japan relations. The Japanese PM vows to further soften Seoul-Tokyo relations, which Biden welcomed. South Korean documents on two civil revolutions, a symbol of South Korea's democracy, have been added to UNESCO's Memory of the World Register. The three-day G7 summit in Hiroshima kicks off today, with the war in Ukraine and China ambitions over Taiwan expected to dominate discussions. President Yoon also travels to Hiroshima to speak at the expanded session and also for possible trilateral talks with Biden and Kishida. Our 신세벽 starts off.
South Korean President Yoon will fly over to Hiroshima on Friday for the G7 summit. He will be the fourth South Korean leader to participate in the multilateral event. The three-day summit kicks off Friday with opening events and discussions for the G7 countries, the United States, Japan, Germany, the United Kingdom, France, Canada, and Italy. The total of 9 sessions will start on Friday with a discussion about the global economy over a working lunch, and in the afternoon, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky joining virtually. Indo-Pacific-related issues, most likely centered around Chinese issues, along with nuclear disarmament, are also expected over a working dinner. On Saturday, economic security talks in the morning will be followed by expanded sessions with 8 invited countries, including South Korea, India, and Australia. The talks will cover 2 themes: food, public health, development, and gender, and climate change and energy security, where Yoon is to share his views on. On the final day, an event for invited leaders and a session on peace, stability, and prosperity will precede the closing ceremony. President Yoon will be returning to Seoul on Sunday. Meanwhile, during the 3-day summit, Yoon is set to have one-on-one meetings with 6 government leaders. Those include talks with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida on Sunday. The 2 leaders are also scheduled to make a joint visit to a monument honoring Korean victims of the 1945 atomic bomb that wrecked Hiroshima. The highly anticipated trilateral summit between Yoon, Kishida, and U.S. President Joe Biden has not been announced yet. However, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan on Wednesday said the 3 leaders are eager to meet and that it's a matter of scheduling, while mentioning Biden has a packed schedule. 신세벽, Arirang News.
South Korea and Japan are expected to continue improving ties at the G7. The U.S. is welcoming the recent efforts of the 2 neighboring countries to improve ties in light of the growing nuclear threat from North Korea and China's assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific region. Our Lee Soo-jin reports.
South Korea and Japan are expected to continue mending ties at the G7 summit this Friday through Sunday in Hiroshima. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida met with U.S. President Joe Biden on Thursday ahead of the G7 summit, where he said he will continue to work towards improving South Korea-Japan relations. Biden responded that he welcomes news of the 2 nations strengthening ties. This comes after Kishida extended an invitation to South Korean President Yoon to be a guest at the summit of the Group of 7. Earlier this month, the 2 leaders held a summit in Seoul. Ahead of the G7, Kishida and Biden also discussed ways to strengthen their trilateral relations with South Korea regarding North Korea's nuclear threats and China's growing assertiveness. Nuclear issues are likely to figure prominently at the G7 summit, whose host city Hiroshima was devastated by an atomic bomb at the end of World War II. Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington have a three-way summit scheduled on the sidelines, where the three nations are likely to discuss North Korea's growing missile threats as well as deterrence measures. The United States has welcomed recent efforts by South Korea and Japan to improve relations as North Korea's increasing long-range missile capabilities are regarded as not only a threat to South Korea and Japan's security, but also to the U.S. mainland. Seoul and Tokyo are also concerned about potential security threats that may arise from a potential conflict between China and Taiwan, while the United States is looking to counter China's growing global influence. 이수진, Arirang News.
The South Korean government is set to announce details of its trip to Fukushima to inspect the wastewater there. The announcement will be made Friday in a press briefing, which will include members of the inspection team and its planned activities. The briefing will be attended by First Deputy Chief of the Office for Government Policy Coordination, Park Gu-yeon, along with other government officials, including from the Foreign and Oceans Ministries. South Korea and Japan held 2 rounds of talks about the trip over the past week, agreeing to make the inspection last for 4 days with around 20 inspectors. The leaders of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan are poised to sit down for the 3rd time, this time in the Japanese city of Hiroshima. Heading up their talks will be an extension to what was discussed last time in Phnom Penh, where they agreed to share real-time North Korean missile information. For more, let's turn to Professor Brian Mars from Dongsa University. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
First off, it's widely believed among many experts that beefing up trilateral coordination against North Korea is essential and crucial. Now, why is that, Professor? Why is such trilateral cooperation inevitable at this time?
Well, it's always been desirable, but the quicker North Korea can launch a nuclear weapon by using solid-fueled missiles, for example, the more important it becomes for Japan, the United States, and South Korea to share warning information as fast as possible. And just over the past few months, we've seen both Seoul and Tokyo take a little too much time to ascertain the exact nature of North Korean missile launches, like the Hwasong-18 last month, for example. And that's a big problem. Now, obviously, everything has to go through the Americans because the South Koreans and Japanese are not allies. But if this planned radar sharing system goes into operation, the 3 countries will effectively be sharing information instantaneously via the American command in Hawaii. And I think a well-functioning trilateral relationship would go a long way toward disabusing North Korea of its hope of somehow luring South Korea out of the American camp. And that's a hope which Pyongyang has never really given up. But I think for a trilateral relationship to work, it would have to be able to survive political changes here in South Korea. The problem has been really since the 1950s that Seoul's readiness to work with Japan has varied dramatically depending on who's in power here. And these mood swings here every 5 years, if I can call them that, militate against a healthy trilateral relationship.
I see. Now, according to Japanese media outlets, then, Seoul and Tokyo are nearing agreement on connecting their radar through a U.S. system to share real-time North Korean missile information. The question is, how much of that information sharing do you think the 2 sides will be able to agree to share this time?
Yeah, I guess we'll find out more during the defense ministers' meeting in Singapore next month, but I think they'll agree to share quite a lot. We've been hearing for a long time, the South Korean public won't accept close military cooperation with Japan. But the reaction to President Yoon's improvement of relations with Tokyo has generally been one of benign indifference, judging from the resurgence of South Korean consumer interest in buying Japan. The No Japan boycott of 2019 seems to be ancient history already.
Right.
So I think that as long as the Yoon government is in power, South Korea will want to share missile warning information virtually unconditionally with the Japanese. The question for me is whether Tokyo will want to do more than the bare minimum with Seoul. I mean, Yoon's successor could very well revert to Korean nationalism and revive Japanese fears of clandestine inter-Korean cooperation. And let's remember, those fears were what actuated Japan's removal of South Korea from its export whitelist 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I don't think we'll see trilateral information sharing reach its full potential until the Japanese are confident that it's sustainable across different South Korean administrations.
Right. We do have the defense ministers meeting coming up next month, so let's keep an eye on that as well. But we also have to talk about the concerns that the three sides may share different understanding when it comes to sharing real-time North Korean missile warning info. For instance, the missile sharing movement could be interpreted as joining the U.S.-led missile defense system, MD, especially to countries like China. Now, Professor Myers, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think there is a very high likelihood that missile sharing would indeed be, well, the information sharing would indeed be interpreted in that way, in which case the Chinese would doubtless accuse South Korea of violating the famous three no's, which Moon Jae-in delivered to Xi Jinping 6 years ago. You know, one of those three no's was the promise not to participate in the Americans' missile defense network. Now, of course, as the Yoon government sees it, all this radar sharing would be purely aimed at nullifying the North Korean threat. But that's how South Korea also tried to justify installing the THAAD anti-missile system. And we all remember how angry the Chinese were about that. So if the South Koreans do want to go ahead with this, they should maybe brace themselves for some unpleasant rhetoric, not just from Beijing, but from Moscow too, which has always said that the Americans' Aegis missile defense system, with which Japanese ships are also equipped, is not all about the North Korean threat like the Americans say it is.
Right. It is indeed quite an uncomfortable and unpleasant situation for South Korea. Then what stance should Seoul take when cooperating with the U.S. and Japan, especially when it comes to countering North Korean provocations and dealing with North Korean issues, Professor?
Well, you know, I think it should be a stable stance, to put things as simply as possible. South Korea changes its foreign policies and its policy to North Korea a little too drastically from one administration to the next. The last South Korean president seemed to abandon prior agreements made with Tokyo dating all the way back to the 1960s. And of course, President Yoon doesn't consider himself bound by Moon Jae-in's three no's, which admittedly were not a formal treaty, but still. I don't think you can find another liberal democracy in the world whose relations with neighboring states change so much depending on which party is in power. And this unpredictability, I think, diminishes trust in South Korea and nurtures the North Koreans' hope, which I've already referred to, of someday breaking apart the South Korean alliance with the US. So I think it's necessary for the two main parties in Seoul to refrain from foreign policy and military initiatives that do not enjoy bipartisan support, so that more continuity can be maintained, because that continuity is absolutely vital to South Korea's standing in the international community.
Right, and also when it comes to dealing with Korean Peninsula issues, it is vital. It will remain vital.
I agree.
All right. Thank you, Professor, for your time this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
South Korea's archival records linked to two of the country's historic grassroots revolutions have been added to UNESCO's Memory of the World Register. Now, the latest edition brings the total number of South Korean heritage items on UNESCO list to 18. Lee Seung-ja has more.
The April 19th revolution led to the resignation of President Syngman Rhee and became a cornerstone for the development of democracy in South Korea. And long before this movement, the Donggak Peasant Revolution in the late Joseon dynasty fought against corrupt leadership and foreign aggression. Both events were integral in South Korea's push to achieve democracy. To mark the significance of the two movements, UNESCO on Thursday added South Korea's archival records related to the two grassroots revolutions to UNESCO's Memory of the World Register. According to the Cultural Heritage Administration, the archives of the April 19th revolution included over 1,000 materials related to the 1960 civil uprising that ended the dictatorship of South Korea's first president in 1960. The documents show the causes and development of the revolution and are made up of materials from government agencies, the National Assembly, and political parties, as well as media articles, personal records, investigative reports, photographs, and videos. And the archives of the Donggak Peasant Revolution consist of a total of 185 documents related to the uprising against the corruption within the ruling class and the fight against the Japanese presence in Korea. The civil movement consisted of an armed rebellion led by peasants and followers of the Donggak religion during the Joseon dynasty. The latest edition brings the total of South Korea's heritage items on the UNESCO list to 18, and the first since 2017, when a royal seal, an investiture book collection from the Joseon dynasty, the archives of the National Debt Redemption Movement, and Joseon Tongshinsa, which consist of diplomatic records of Korean envoys to Japan, were all added to the UNESCO list. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Next Wednesday, South Korea will take another significant step for its space industry with the third launch of its homegrown space rocket, Nuri. Now, Nuri will have 8 actual satellites on board rather than dummy satellites. Let's turn to our Choi Soo-hyung for details.
South Korea's aerospace history will be rewritten on May 24th. The Nuri space rocket's third launch is completely different from the 2 previous ones. The first and second launches in October 2021 and June 2022 were test launches with dummies, but this time is the first operational launch carrying 8 actual satellites. So, which satellites will be on board? First, the largest and heaviest main payload satellites, next-generation small satellites the second, made by KST, will be placed at the front of the third stage of Nuri. It has a main camera with a resolution of 5 meters, an observation width of 40 kilometers, and weighs 150 kilograms to help it explore 600 to 800 kilometers of mission altitude ranges. It uses an imaging radar that is not affected by light or clouds, day and night, or even severe weather conditions.
NextSat II is primarily a satellite that captures radar images. It is a synthetic satellite that sends radar waves and detects the return waves to create composite images. It differs from the optical camera images and has differences in performance compared to the existing Arirang 5 satellite due to its scale.
4 Doyosat, named after small but fast birds, developed by the Korea Astronomy and Space Science Institute, will also be on board. It is also known as SNIPE, small-scale magnetospheric and ionospheric plasma experiment, the world's very first, where 4 satellites fly in formation to observe space weather. 4 nanosatellites, Garam, Nare, Dasol, and Raon, about 10 kilograms each, will provide real-time transmission of fine space plasma distribution, Earth's magnetic field, solar wind, and space storms at a mission altitude of 500 kilometers. In this third launch, the achievements of Korean satellite manufacturing companies are noticeable. The space radiation detector by Lumir, the optical payload by JustTech, and the polarimetric camera by Kyrospace will perform their respective missions. In particular, Kyrospace's CUBE satellites will come back to Earth automatically without space debris after the mission is complete. These 8 satellites will be a milestone for Korea as a space powerhouse, venturing into space with the country's cutting-edge technology. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashley, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in the United States, where Montana has become the first state to ban the popular short-form video sharing platform TikTok. Governor Greg Gianforte signed the bill on Wednesday. He said to protect the personal data of Montana residents from the Chinese Communist Party. It's been alleged that the TikTok's parent company has close ties to Beijing and that the app collects users' private data for use by the Chinese government. The new law will begin in January next year. It will ban app stores from offering TikTok within the state, with a potential fine for violators of up to $10,000 per day. TikTok could also be hit with similar fines if it continues to operate within the state. But it's unclear how this will be enforced. Individual users, however, will not be fined. TikTok has responded, calling the ban unlawful. It's promised to defend the rights of its users to continue using the app in the state. Turning over to Colombia now, rescue teams are desperately searching for 4 children believed to have survived a plane crash. Search teams on Wednesday reportedly found a makeshift shelter and items belonging to the children in the thick Colombian jungle. The find generated initial confusion as Colombian President Gustavo Petro on the same day tweeted that the children had been found alive. He deleted his tweet a short time later as reports of their discovery were unconfirmed. The ages of the children range between 13 years and just 11 months. They were aboard a small plane on May 1st, along with their mother, a pilot and a co-pilot when the crash occurred. None of the adults survived. In sports news, tennis legend Rafael Nadal has withdrawn from the French Open. The 22-time Grand Slam champion made the announcement Thursday, citing a hip injury. The injury came during a second-round Australian Open defeat in January, which Nadal said is taking longer than expected to heal. The 36-year-old added he will be away from the sport for the next few months, and that 2024 is likely to be his final year playing professional tennis. He said that he plans to return in September for the Davis Cup finals. Known as the King of Clay, Nadal has previously won the clay court French Open 14 times. And finally, remarkable video from Türkiye circulating on social media shows a sofa seemingly gliding through the air during a storm. Strong winds sent the furniture hurtling into the sky from the balcony of a high-rise building on Wednesday as heavy rains and storms hit the Turkish capital of Ankara. Local reports say the sofa landed in the garden of a person filming the video and remained in one piece. The storms also blew off roofs and windows and uprooted trees.
Good morning. Those of us in the western parts of the country need to brace for more summer heat again. Not to mention, as for the capital area, we didn't get much relief from the heat yesterday, so it will be as hot. While those in East Coast regions will have much lower daytime highs due to easterly winds this afternoon. Also, further west, you will have stronger sunshine with higher UV rays. The sun's rays are strongest between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., so please limit exposure to the sun during these hours if you can, and sun protection is a must. Meanwhile, ozone levels will be high in Incheon during the day. Top readings in Seoul will be at 28 degrees, Daejeon at 27, and Gyeongju, where daytime highs were near 35 degrees on Tuesday, will get up to just 22 degrees this afternoon. Meanwhile, we'll have normal to good air quality nationwide all day today. A mostly sunny and warm weekend is in the forecast, but temperatures will go down a few notches then today. That's Korea for you. Here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That wraps up today's New Day at Arirang. Thanks for watching.